Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Mama's Legacy podcast. I'm joined here with Vala. Is that right?
You got it, man. Vala. Some people call me Vala the Bala. 20-inch blades on the Impala. If you're a Houstonian, you'll know that reference. Good to be on the podcast, man. I've been following you guys. You guys are doing great things, a lot of dedication. And I'm just happy to be a part of the process.
Hey, huge fans of what you're doing too. I mean, you're knocking 4 or 5 episodes out when you record, so that's more impressive than what we're doing. But again, thank you for coming on, man, and love having you here. But let's jump right into this, and let's start off with the Knicks. Julius Randle has stunk it up this postseason. Do you still think he's going to get a really high contract from the Knicks this offseason?
Absolutely, man. Julius Randle, he's been an interesting case study. If you look at him pretty much from his college years all the way up until the position he's in with the Knicks now, I feel like Randle was a guy coming out of college, lottery pick, top five prospect, kind of thrown into an unfavorable situation with the Lakers. I don't know if you recall, as a Lakers fan here, his very first regular season game playing against my Houston Rockets, he broke his foot and essentially missed his entire rookie season. He goes on to suffer through the Mamba farewell tour, and I only say suffer from the perspective of young talent developing. So now that he has his own team, I think these are growing pains for a young superstar really looking to take command of his own team, his own franchise. And he made big strides in a market like New York. The expectations there are unlike anything across the league, with the exception of maybe LA and Boston. But just from what you've been able to see from a bubble condensed season, I think he gets a pass for his playoff performance, especially when you consider really he's the only superstar, prime superstar that can get to his spots on that Knicks team, which doesn't bode too well for a playoff series when you've got another team that can game plan for you, that can cut you off from your spots and can really hone in a team defensive scheme on you for a 7-game series. So if I had to take a guess, I would say yes, Julius Randle is well deserving of that max slot, and he's going to go ahead and get that.
I honestly believe he will too. I mean, it's his first year being in the playoffs and being relied on to be that guy that can win the series. So, you're gonna be scared. I mean, everybody is first year. I mean, Trae Young, the only reason I think it looks bad on Julius Randle is because Trae Young's the one handing out the punishment. He's also being, I think this is his first time being the guy that they rely on in the playoffs. So that's, I think, why it may look a little bit worse. But I've always liked Julius Randle. Just unfortunately, my Lakers cannot develop young talent for shit. Uh, Ingram, he plays average for us, goes out, he's an all-star. Josh Hart, he was like a bench warmer for us. He's in New Orleans getting solid minutes. Lonzo Ball, he's in arguments for a big contract this summer. And Kuzma, I guarantee you, if we trade him when we do, he's going to become an all-star outside of here. And as same goes for Julius Randle, leaves and becomes that guy. So we can't develop talent, and we're finally seeing what Randle can be. And I do believe he's deserving of this contract. I believe everybody that I just mentioned deserves what they get. He's finally been able to take a team, but right now the Knicks, the reason he's playing so bad is he has no help other than Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose, he's been playing amazing, but if you're going up against the Hawks, they're not stacked, but they have a lot of talent. John Collins, Clint Capella, Trae Young. The Knicks, they have Derrick Rose and Julius Randle, who's in his first big playoff series. So, I think this was favored toward the Hawks this series.
Most definitely. And, the Hawks have a lot of veteran leadership on that team. You've got Bogdanovich, who's played in Europe, who's got a lot of experience in this league, maybe not playoff experience, but he's a bona fide bucket, right? You've got a lot of other guys. Clint Capella had long playoff stretches with the Houston Rockets going up against those prime Warriors teams. So the Hawks had more help. And, the Knicks, you can't really count Tom Thibodeau out in terms of coaching and that cast of, early 2000s Chicago Bulls guys, Taj Gibson off the bench, Derrick Rose, all these other guys mixing in well for a New York veteran group. But unfortunately, you just didn't have that guy who could give you 30 to 40 minutes of production and be that player. But at the same time, you can't, as a New York Knicks fan, I think you're in a pretty good spot here. Let's not forget just a few years ago in that big free agency bid when big names like LeBron, like AD, wouldn't even sit down and take meetings with the Knicks. And now you're starting to hear rumblings around the league about guys like Devin Booker, about guys like Kyrie, about guys like Bradley Beal, saying even Zion Williamson, if we're talking about young talent looking to emerge over the next few years, saying that, hey, Madison Square Garden, what a place to play. And I feel like this vibe, this attitude towards the Knicks was not present now that you've seen Dolan kind of take a back seat to the organization and leave basketball operations in the hands of new management. I think the Knicks are starting to be a bright, bright team. And while the young talent may not be there in terms of a young guy who's going to be a top 5 player in the league, don't get me wrong. I think RJ Barrett, Quickly, Mitchell, these guys are all going to be great young rotational pieces, but I don't think any of them are franchise cornerstone guys. I do think the Knicks have the pieces in place to maybe attract that star guy, maybe like a Bradley Beal or a Devin Booker, should they enter free agency or be disgruntled.
I definitely agree with that. Except I think RJ can be a cornerstone piece. This regular season, he turned up, showed that he was supposed to be a high draft pick. I think he's got a couple more years to go, but I do believe that he could be a cornerstone player for this Knicks team.
Hey, he's still young, right? He's going to be 21 next year. Only in his second year, he's showing signs of running an offense. So the case can be made for RJ Barrett. It's just as a Houston Rockets fan, I'm hurt by seeing any left-handed player succeed with the departure of James Harden. So I have to throw that out there for my own sake.
Well, I mean, you have KPG, the KPJ, the mini Harden. So
yeah, the strip clubs are still alive in Houston, so we're doing good with KPJ.
The Houston fans. I mean, I'm down here in Houston. They love this team, so you can't be too mad. Another thing to talk about: the New Orleans Pelicans. They have a bunch of talent on that roster, but they have not been able to make it work. The players are not vibing with Van Gundy, who I think is an amazing coach. I mean, what do you think the Pelicans should do? I mean, you got Steven Adams there. I think he's a solid big man. You got Zion. Obviously, he's the face of that franchise. You got Ingram. You got to get back Ball. Hopefully, he doesn't go. But like, there's some names they can get rid of, like Bledsoe. I mean, Bledsoe's Bledsoe. I mean, he's going to hold you back a little bit. You can't say too much there. But where do you think this Pelicans team needs to go this offseason?
First and foremost, man, let's get this out of the way. Is there any disagreement that the New Orleans Pelicans were basketball's most disappointing team in 2021?
No, there's no argument there.
So with that in mind, man, you look at some of the moves that management's made. You have to laud them for the Anthony Davis move and getting the Godfather package that they got. But ever since then, I think philosophically, there's been a question mark as to how this Pelicans team is building their squad around Zion Williamson. I mean, you've got a 20-year-old guy who just gave you 27 and 7 on 61% from the field. And I think his at the rim percentages were something like 81, 82%. It's stupid, right? He could get to a spot. He got pretty much whatever shot he wanted, and the efficiency in which he got those shots was unreal. I think where I disagree with you tends to be with coaching. I'm not a big fan of Stan Van Gundy with this squad. We've seen him go with a lot of traditional lineups in the past. You saw what he did with Detroit, trying to put Josh Smith at the 4, put Andre Drummond at the center position, and build around them at the point in time when they had Reggie Jackson running their backcourt. And I think you're seeing a little bit of that with this Pelicans team. Spacing has been a huge problem with them, man. You know, Eric Bledsoe, I think you said it best. Eric Bledsoe is Eric Bledsoe at this point in his career. A lot of people saw him as the piece that held back Giannis and the Bucks from getting to the next level. So it's going to be hard to move off of that contract. A 6-foot-tall point guard who relies on athleticism, going on age 31, he's going to be 32 next year, who's always been an inefficient volume guy. Moving him, I think, has to be the first priority. And there's promise in moving him from the perspective that you have all those assets that you got from the Anthony Davis trade. So hopefully you can attach some of those pieces to Eric Bledsoe and move on from him. Now, as far as Steven Adams goes, one of my best friends is an OKC Thunder fan. You know, he talks about Steven Adams with the Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant era, and how he was such a great pick and roll guy and a great, tough, gritty presence for that team. He's been telling me this isn't the same Steven Adams that he saw in OKC, whether that's injury, whether that's being a complementary piece to a Zion Williamson that's not stretching the court either. I think Steven Adams is going to be one that when you ask the Pelicans fan base, they're really split on how they feel about him, whether or not it's time to move on from him or if he's going to be the center moving forward. But that's another question mark, man. I think Bledsoe and Adams are the two pieces you've got to move up to kind of make room for Ingram, Zion, Ball, and Hart, like you mentioned, all young guys who've got great potential. and can really be a contributing four guys in a 7 or 8 man rotation in a playoff series. The real question has to be is, as Pelicans fans, are you more really moving towards developing these guys and allowing that to be the growth of your team? Or is this team missing a third piece, which I really think they are? I think they're missing another backcourt guy who can relieve pressure off of Ingram in these tough fourth quarter games. You see Ingram struggle to get to his spots, but you've got three guys who are all-star level, all-star caliber players. The question is going to be for the Pelicans in the near future, how do you surround them with veteran leadership, veteran pieces that more importantly fit, which I don't think Adams and Eric Bledsoe do. And then the Van Gundy question, man. I'm a fan of the Van Gundys. Jeff Van Gundy lives here in Houston. I see him running around Rice University almost every week. It's hard to miss his shining, balding head reflecting the sun. But I don't think Stan Van Gundy is the coach for this team. He's more of a traditional early 2000s coach, like we saw the way he built a team around Dwight Howard in Orlando. But for them to unlock Zion and Brandon Ingram, I think they're going to require new coaching, someone a little more unorthodox in line with today's NBA. So that's kind of my perspective on the Pelicans, man. How do you feel about that? I know I'm going against a couple of your points, but again, the Pelicans are a team that a lot of people are having a hard time figuring out.
No, definitely with the Pelicans, everything's kind of split. Whatever move you make, there's always going to be a counter argument not to make it, except for with Bledsoe, of course, he can go.
Yeah.
But Steven Adams, I think I think you need a stretch five to help Zion. Steven Adams is not that guy. I love Steven. You can get some value from him, but I think re-signing Lonzo Ball is a must for this team. He brings, I think, the best out of Ingram and Zion. He lets them take more shots because he's not taking them himself. He's a amazing passer. His IQ is out of this world. I mean, it's not up there with like a Russ or LeBron level, but it could be there by the time he retires. I think he's like already on a Rondo level, and I think he's a for sure keep. I think you definitely got to bring some more veteran leaders in. But I will ask you this. This is what I've kind of thought about. So the Rockets are rebuilding, obviously. Would you take Bledsoe and a first for John Wall?
Oh, in a heartbeat. Are you kidding me? That's a no-brainer. John Wall's got 4 years left on this contract. And there's a lot of people in Houston hoping that he makes a buyout demand and kind of cuts that contract short, because the backcourt in Houston, you've got a lot of young pieces and a potential other young piece coming in the form of a Cade Cunningham or potentially a Jalen Suggs or even Jalen Green for that matter. So you've got to open up playing time for them. And Eric Bledsoe, I mean, he's not the kind of guy to be a locker room issue. He's getting 30 minutes a game on this Pelicans team. You know, he's going to be 32. I think he's conscious of where his career is at, and he'll be okay with taking a mentor-like position. But John Wall's a high usage guy. And as a Houston fan, I would absolutely love to get off that contract for a guy in Bledsoe who has a 1 year shorter contract length and isn't going to require the touches that John Wall does. Now, the question for the Pelicans becomes, is John Wall a fit for this team? Again, John Wall's a decent catch and shoot guy, but he's by no means a three-point shooter. And he's another guy whose game relies on athleticism, who's going to be 31 years old, coming off not playing basketball in 2.5 years, having really the only significant stretch of basketball this year in which he tore his meniscus and is going to get a scope. So John Wall is kind of the big question mark for Houston fans. From the Houston angle, I would absolutely take Eric Bledsoe in a first-round pick. Keep bringing those assets in, keep developing these young talents, and see where you go from there. See where you land in this draft lottery, which is kind of what's holding everyone up in Houston. But I don't know if that makes so much sense for the Pelicans. I think he'd be better than Eric Bledsoe, most certainly. But I don't think that the Pelicans are in any hurry to absorb a contract like John Wall or give up assets for that matter to move off of Bledsoe when you're putting more money on your books.
I think I kind of disagree with that because Zion, I mean, you saw him talk about Madison Square Garden. You want to do whatever you can to make sure he's happy, even if it's a small graded position. Better change because he's not going to stay with this Pelicans team if they don't make the playoffs. John Wall, I think he's an instant upgrade over Bledsoe. And if it works out like it, in theory, it should, that draft pick wouldn't be too high. I think they are a fifth, sixth seed team, right? If they got that, if Zion keeps playing, I think you move Steven Adams. I think you get something if Lonzo Ball resigns. I think this is a playoff team. That first round pick, it's a late first. Those aren't worth terribly too much. They're worth a little bit. But honestly, I think you do whatever you can to make sure Zion stays here, because what are the chances another Zion level player walks into New Orleans? Not very
It
high.
doesn't happen every year, man. It doesn't happen every 10 years, right? For a team like New Orleans to attract a talent like Zion, who in his second year is putting up the numbers he's putting up, you're right. You do everything you can to surround him with the talent that you want. You look at Miami and how NBA Twitter is dogging Miami for not taking that James Harden trade and wasting a year of Butler's prime and young Adebayo. You look at the same way with Zion Williamson, maybe John Wall being a 20-point per game, 7 assists per game guy. And again, we talk about veteran leadership. John Wall, by all accounts, was a great locker room guy in Washington, other than, a few gang sign incidents that he's apt to do. He can be that guy in New Orleans as long as he stays professional and he's got a good culture in that locker room, which it looks like he's got. It looks like New Orleans is doing good things with their young talent. So that's an interesting move, man. As a Houston fan, I'll tell you what, I haven't heard anybody propose that. And I think I would take it from the Houston angle. If you can convince New Orleans fans, that might be a win-win on both sides.
Yeah, no, I still think it'd be a win-win because not very many teams are going to get, you're not going to get Bledsoe dropped off, let alone get something back for Bledsoe. At least with Wall, you get a good basketball talent back. And then even if you don't re-sign Lonzo, you still have a solid point guard that you can give 20, 30 minutes a night to. So I think that's a one for Pelicans fans to think about. Next thing, I know you're a Rockets fan, so you're looking forward to this. The lottery. If let's just say Cade Cunningham's not available, who do you take with your pick? Let's just say first pick, Thunder get it, and then to you, they take Cade. Who do you take?
This is a topic of huge contention in terms of Houston Rockets Twitter. Of course, the consensus number one is looking more and more like Cade Cunningham, right? You've got a 6'7" point guard who can get to his spots. He's an excellent shooter. He's got defensive potential, and the upside on him is higher than any other player in this draft. There's two other guys that I see in terms of fits for this Rockets team. Number one, I think is the player that has the most bust potential, but also has potential to be the best complementary piece next to Christian Wood. And that's Evan Mobley, big guy out of USC. I think Evan Mobley, the potential that he's shown in terms of having the footwork to be able to stay on quicker guards on pick and roll switches, which is really the name of the game in today's NBA defensive schemes, the ability to be a rim protector, which Christian Wood absolutely has not been. A lot of people around the league see Christian Wood as the stretch five, but if you've watched any Rockets games this year, he mightily struggles against bigs that can give him issues like Jokic, like Joel Embiid, like the bevy of young centers that you have out west. Even Anthony Davis, who's a little bit of a tweener, a stretch 4 or 5, gives him big issues. So I think the number one guy that I lean towards is Evan Mobley. And then the other one that a lot of Rockets fans are looking at tends to be Jalen Green, right? Jalen Green has absolutely put on a show in the G League this year. He gave you 20 points a game on pretty decent efficiency, some pretty good shooting numbers as a volume scorer, which was the big question mark on him coming out of high school. And as we've seen with Luka Doncic, I think professional experience, you cannot underscore the importance of when you make that transition to the NBA. And while Evan Mobley is going up against cream of the crop talent in the NCAA, Jalen Green is going up against grown men. Jalen Green is in a locker room getting advice and mentorship from former NBA players. So as a scorer, which this Houston Rockets team is really lacking, I think KPJ, they want him to be more of a point guard, of a Harden mold. And one of the mistakes that the Houston Rockets made when they had James Harden is they could never really pair him with an all-star caliber guard that could give you 70 to 80 games. I mean, Chris Paul, you had that one season out of him in 2018 where you were a hamstring away from beating the greatest team in NBA history. And then 2019, he wasn't the same. He got a little chubby. This was pre-vegan Chris Paul, and he dealt with some injury issues as well. And then Russell Westbrook, I'm not even going to get into. I don't think we have enough time to talk about Russell Westbrook, but he's the ultimate playoff dud, in my opinion. So pairing KPJ with a guy like Jalen Green, who's a proven scorer among the professionals, and really, I think, has the most athleticism in terms of a wing player in these top 4 or 5 guys, would be another solid move for the Rockets. I don't know if you're going to hate me for saying this. I've got a lot of flack on our podcast, but I'm not a fan of Suggs. I don't think he's got all-star potential. I think he's a borderline all-star, starting caliber player who's kind of like a George Hill, but with a much higher ceiling, who can give you 20 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, great locker room presence, great perimeter defender. But when you're in the position that the Houston Rockets are in, you need star level talent. And Jalen Green and Evan Mobley, I think, have that upside that Suggs doesn't have.
Well, my top one would be Jonathan Kuminga. I think he's
Wow.
I think he's being very underrated in this draft because the big names, they're all getting the top. Jonathan Kuminga, he can almost play like a guard, but he's the small forward, power forward. But scenarios, he can handle the ball pretty well. I mean, he averaged 15 and 7, which was really good. And I think if he can get his court vision down a little bit better, I think this guy's one of the best wings in this draft for sure. Now, do I think
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Do I think he'd have the best fit in Houston with his roster right now? No, I think that's if you get rid of Eric Gordon, I think he fills in his spot at a better level for a cheaper price.
Kuminga is very interesting. Before the NBA season ended and the G League playoffs were still going on, I was very high on Kuminga, but circumstantially so. Remember Kawhi Leonard out of San Diego State? What was everyone saying about Kawhi coming out of college? What was his biggest weakness? Do you remember?
His leadership.
Leadership, playmaking. Mostly the biggest thing that a reason the Houston Rockets couldn't get him was the shooting. He fell all the way to the 13th, 14th pick range because he couldn't hit the 3-ball or the mid-range game. So he was drafted into a very favorable position in San Antonio where he wasn't forced to be the guy that had to carry the load, that had to be a leader, that had to be your scorer, but he developed that 3-point shot over the course of his career. And I think Jonathan Kuminga gives me heavy Kawhi Leonard vibes in terms of his length, in terms of his build, in terms of the potential to be a lockdown perimeter guy. I think if Kuminga is drafted into a team where he's not forced to be that guy, much like a Kawhi Leonard was, I think Kuminga has the potential to be a, Kawhi Leonard type, an all NBA type player, just with the tools that he has athletically speaking. But, 24% from 3 on 5 attempts a game, 39% from the field. He's still young. He's got time to improve this aspect of his game, but I think he needs to be developed a little bit more. So that's why for the Rockets, I would pass on Kuminga. But you're right, Jay. In terms of prospects go, Kuminga's right up there, man. He's one of the 4 best guys. I don't think he'll make an impact right away, but who's to say 2-3 years down the line, Kuminga's not one of the 2 best guys from this draft?
No, I mean, he is the best defender in this draft by far, I think. And with Houston, I don't think he'd have to be the number 1 scorer on that team. I mean, Christian Wood and let's be honest, that Bledsoe trade's probably not going to happen. But John Wall, he's going to try and get the ball. KPJ, he's going to be scoring the ball. They want him scoring a lot more. I think that might actually be really good for him. He can just play solid defense on that wing because then you don't have to worry about, some of the young guys on that Rockets team are not the best at defense, in my opinion. I don't think KPJ is a lockdown defender by any means. I think Kuminga can really help. Not yet. I really hated KPJ at the start. I said he wouldn't even be a starter level, but I was proven wrong. I think Jonathan Kuminga can come in there. He can play solid defense for the first couple of years he's there. And then once the older guys are getting moved out of there, I think he can work on his scoring and be a great third option for this team.
He's definitely the biggest wild card among these prospects. He's got, this is a buzzword of sorts that you hear a lot of times with prospects, but I think he has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor of all the players in this top 4 ranking that we just laid out. So he's going to be an interesting one, man. If the Rockets ended up with him at, say, the number 3 or number 4 overall pick, I wouldn't be complaining. You wouldn't hear any laurels out of me. I think he'd be a great pick. I think he's a great prospect to develop. And you're right, man. I don't think he'd necessarily be thrown into the fire in Houston, but still, the prospect of a KPJ, Jalen Green backcourt just excites me, or even a Christian Wood, Evan Mobley front court. I think the compliment that those guys present to your up-and-coming budding stars is a lot more exciting than a Kuminga. But at the same time, Kuminga, Bring him on down to Houston if he's there at number 4.
I can agree with that. I mean, personally, I think he's probably going to fall to like Detroit or something, but I think he's being a little bit underrated. Now let's take the same scenario. Rockets get the first pick, they take Cade. You're the Thunder. What do you think the Thunder do? Do you think they make the same decision, or do you think they go for somebody else? Because they do have a point guard in Shea.
Yeah, so Shea, man, you want to talk about underrated young talents in the NBA. SGA might just be one of the most underrated guards in this league. And you saw him I don't want to say he took a step back, but he really benefited from Chris Paul's leadership and ability to take the load and the pressure off of him in OKC playing in that backcourt. So I think the Thunder are in an interesting position here to be able to draft really anywhere. You've got backcourt pieces in Luguentz Dort, who took a major step forward this year. Thunder fans are excited to see what he can do. 6'4" lockdown perimeter defender who's showing some signs of offensive development as well. Where the Thunder lack depth, though, is going to be in their front court, right? You want to get a big guy here. And I think Evan Mobley he's the obvious pick for OKC if he falls to them at number 2 or number 3. So pairing SGA with a legitimate pick and roll threat, I think is going to be interesting. And Mobley really solidifies their defense as they have 2 of the best perimeter defenders in SGA and Dort. You get a guy like Mobley to kind of anchor down the paint and the defensive end. I think that'll make things a little more exciting for them. Where do you see them going in the number 2 pick if Cade's off the board?
I definitely think they also go with Evan Mobley. Mobley, he's the best center coming out of this draft. Now his offense is not there right now, but I can see it coming in a year or two. He's a solid 20-point per game scorer later down in his career. I like him. He can even guard power forward. I think you could match him up against AD and be happy with that matchup. That's how versatile of a center I think he is. And he's almost as good as a defender as Kuminga. I got to defend my last choice. But I definitely think they go with Mobley. I think he's the obvious choice. Him and Shea would be an interesting matchup. The only argument you could make is the Thunder throughout the season have had tons of bigger guys come into the rotation and do really well. That's the only really other argument. I think they have solid backup bigs, and they could maybe make an argument to take maybe one of the Jalen's. I don't think that'd be a terrible pick to pair him alongside Shea.
Yeah, and hey, in terms of young guys coming into favorable positions man, it would really suck for Kuminga or Mobley to end up in Detroit because you don't have any veterans on that squad. But being mentored, granted, if these guys are still there, being mentored by Al Horford as your backup center in a locker room, I don't think there's enough stock given to young players going to teams that have older guys that can teach them the way, that can instill a sense of culture that they'll carry with them the rest of their careers, right? I mean, one of the things that I always talk about on our podcast is the effect that Team USA had on a lot of those young superstars early in the 2000s, right? I remember the Redeem Team, 2008. 2009, we saw some of the best seasons from those guys. I think LeBron James was one of the 2 best versions of himself in 2009. Kobe Bryant won his first ring post Shaquille O'Neal in 2009. We saw peak prime D Wade in 2009. So I think culture and leadership is a big thing as well. And getting Mobley in a locker room with guys like George Hill and Al Horford and someone like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's already fed off the leadership of CP3, would be huge for a 20-year-old guy with no professional experience. So the Thunder, I think, they're one of those more exciting teams that you want to see one of the young players that you're excited about land on because, like you said, man, big guys come onto the Thunder and they do well. Backcourt guys like CP3 go to the Thunder and revive their career. I think it's a very favorable position for these younger guys to come into and maximize their potential and be what the draft pundits see them being over the course of 3 or 4 years.
Not only that, I think the Thunder have one big advantage. They are not going to require anybody to come in and change that direction. They got 17 first-round picks. They can take a chance on guys and let them sit on the bench for 2 years if need be. This Thunder team has so many draft picks. It would be impossible to not draft at least 2 or 3 all-star talent levels MVP players.
Yeah, I think Presley's more than made up for the James Harden trade with how he's retooled this team post Russell Westbrook era. So it's going to be exciting to see what they do, man. They're what you hope for in terms of a young team rebuilding after losing really 3 superstars over the course of 5 or 6 years. So we'll see what happens, man. Whoever they get, whether it's one of the Jalen's or Evan Mobley for that matter, I think those guys are going to be in the best possible position on a Thunder team, as opposed to a team like, I even say, the Houston Rockets or a team like Detroit. So it'll be interesting to see who they take. I'm excited for any young talent that ends up on this Thunder squad.
This Thunder squad, they've done the rebuild the right way and arguably one of the best ways I think I've ever seen. I mean, they were even rebuilding last year and still made the playoffs. And now look at them.
Exactly.
They're still got the top. They got 2 picks that could be in the top 5 right now, which is blowing my mind. So Thunder, they're doing it right. They're going to be a threat sooner or later. But I think that's all the time we got today. I really want to thank you for coming on, man.
Hey, anytime. Look, basketball is my life outside of the hospital. So if you ever want to chat basketball, have me on the pod again. I would love to have you on Not Your Weekly Sports Pod. Come on down. This was a good time. I really appreciate you having me on, man. Looking forward to do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon. As soon as I get back from Denver, I will shoot you a text. I'd love to come on, man. Always trying to get myself out there. But you seem to handle yourself amazing. One of the best guests I've had. I just want to say thank you for coming on. And again, thank you for what you're doing outside of basketball.
My pleasure, brother. You guys have a good one.
You too, man. Take care.